this is not good. So where does this come from? Well, it didn't take long to connect the dots and see corporate America, you know? Corporate America was all on board with this. They were making money over this. Their kids weren't going to Vietnam. You know, this was, and what else are they doing? Well, there's no more farmers around here. Where did they all go? They all went to big corporations who bought up the whole, who took control of the for the whole food industry. It was all connected. You know, Vietnam, corporate America. These are not nice corporations. These are not corporations who work for people. These are not corporations who take care of their stakeholders, including their workers and the environment and the community. These are for-profit, bottom line corporations. They don't give a shit about you.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Jake Guest, founder of one of Vermont's longest-running organic farms, Killdeer Farm, and he was an early mentor of my co-director, Dave Chapman. Dave and Jake still live and farm near one another, and this interview is a visit that they had with each other last fall.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm really pleased to be talking to Jake Guest today. Jake is really my first teacher of organic farming, and when I was just a kid, I was half of his first crew when he moved from the Wooden Shoe into Norwich and started Killdeer Farm. And he hired 2 people. I was one of those 2. I had a team of oxen, and I needed to learn how to farm. I had a baby team. I was doing that, and I got to study with Jake for a year. And I learned so much, and as well as being my mentor, you're my friend, and I appreciate a chance to talk with you, Jake. So, I mean, we could do this for a week, but I wanted to start with how you got into farming and organic farming. You're a first-generation farmer, and
right.
Like, you know, it was a really, truly different time and place. So, tell me the story of how you became a farmer.
Well, it started out with politics. I was involved in the anti-war, the Vietnam anti-war movement, and I was at Dartmouth, and we took over the administration building, and we got thrown in jail for doing that. And there were 52 of us, and when we get out of jail, people were pretty fired up and pretty excited and trying to stop the war. And we decided we had some of this camaraderie that had developed through this whole process. It would really attracted us to each other, a group of people. And we decided at one point that we were going to set up a country retreat, sort of, for people in the anti-war movement, and we had grandiose plans of doing that. We even had a printing press and so forth. But anyway, we rented a house. I rented a house. I was probably the oldest one there. We rented a house in a town nearby, and started living together. And it became fairly quickly obvious that living together required so much energy that our politics, although we felt committed, we weren't that active. We were more active in the back to the, there were other groups. There were other similar groups all over Vermont. We were in New Hampshire. And so we were living together and trying to make that work. There was a baby born in the middle of all that, and we decided we want to find a place to live and buy a place, and we found a piece of land in New Hampshire, not too far from the Upper Valley where Dartmouth is, that we was for sale, and it was basically a shell of a old Cape house. It was in terrible shape. It was just, no, I don't think it had windows or anything. It was just a shell of a house. But we moved in the spring of 70, I guess it was, or 71, and there was no electricity, no running water, no telephone. It was decades before social media and the internet and smartphones, so we had no communication. But we decided that one of the high priorities was to get the house fixed up so we could live in the house, which we did. We worked on it. Everybody was, young and full of energy, and we got the house together. And then we felt like, we should try to grow our own food. That it was sort of like a no-brainer. And we actually made friends with a local, a guy. I thought he was an old guy then. He was 65, which seems young now, but he was kind of a mentor, and he came around, and we at the same time there were other groups. We were, back up a minute. It was a time also that people began to get interested. It was sort of the back to the land movement, but people got interested in healthy food. I mean, there seemed to be a connection between political changes in political attitudes and opinions, sort of led into changes in other things, like changes in gender roles and changes in environment. I mean, environmental concerns. I mean, it just those things were obviously connected. Food was obviously connected to politics, and so was how people lived. So was the environment. I remember that we had the first Earth Day about that time, and some of us came in from, it was a commune where we lived. And
the wooden shoe.
The wooden shoe. It's called a wooden shoe. So food. So we were members, and we started, and we were active members of the co-op movement. There was a movement all around the country, but here, I think in New England especially, of you could not buy whole grains. In this area where we live now, you could not buy whole grains.
Going to the supermarket.
There was no such thing as organic. I mean, it just didn't exist. There were some stores in Boston where they had the whole macrobiotic movement. Those people. So we formed these co-ops, and there were buyer clubs, and we would get together once a month and place orders, and then we'd voluntarily, people would drive down to Boston and drive down to New York and buy food. We started out by buying a lot of food from the people, from the suppliers of the what am I trying to say? The Nishiokushi.
Yeah, macrobiotic.
The microbiotic people.
Yeah.
Erewhon in Boston. And
that was after Paul Hawken or before Paul Hawken took it over? I think that was after, actually. There was a while where Paul ran Erewhon,
right,
and became the first kind of going out and buying farms and then wholesaling it.
Right.
And Nishiokushi was, I'm trying to remember when all that happened.
Yeah, I don't remember, but it was about that time.
Yeah, so that was another place where you could go and get what you were looking for.
Yeah, but the only way we could do that was to form these buying. We had these buying groups, and because there was no local distributor or anything. The Hanover Co-op, to give a background, the Hanover Co-op, where we now sell thousands of dollars worth of organic food every year, had 2 people in the produce department and a room that was like the size of a large closet where they would prepare it. And they had, you know, they had produce on the shelves, but it was like it was nothing. It was like, you know, apples and I can't believe it was so small, you know, and people just didn't, you know, with the fresh produce, whatever, you know, it's like sweet corn and the tomatoes and sweet corn, you know, but there also were no farms around here. The only farms around here were these couple older guys, I say old now, probably a lot younger than me now, who had these, one guy in Plainfield, or in Enfield, New Hampshire, used to load he had one old guy, another old guy working for him, and he used to load his truck up and drive around to different restaurants and sell stuff off the back of his truck. Not park on the street and sell it, but go up and knock on the door and say, hey, I got some green beans. You want to buy some green beans? And there were like 2 or 3 of these people around. And that was it. I mean, there were no vegetable farms, none. And ironically, this area, years ago, they used to, in the northern part of Vermont, they used to have a big spinach area that they would sell spinach to, a cannery. And there were sweet corn canneries. And there were strawberries in Bradford, Vermont. They had several strawberry farms, and they used to sell put on the train, overnight train to Boston. But that was way before the time that I'm talking about.
And that was all chemical.
Is what?
All chemical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the guy that advised us how to grow stuff. He would, you know, needless to say, it was 10-10-10 fertilizer, and he had a whole bunch of nasty things that, you know, they sprayed with.
So
yeah. Anyway,
hang on a second. So a couple things. One is, I just want to point out that when you were at Dartmouth and you occupied Parkhurst, you'd already been in the Army, right?
Yes.
You had gone away, served a tour of duty in the Army, and then come back.
Yeah, I went to Dartmouth. I don't know how I ever got in. I guess because I'm from New Hampshire and they have some kind of deal with the state of New Hampshire, because New Hampshire gave them a bunch. Anyway, so I got accepted at Dartmouth and proceeded to flunk out the first year, like as fast as you possibly could flunk out. And they kicked me out. And they said, well, maybe you should take care of your military service. That's what they used to call it. So I joined the Army. And Vietnam was not happening. There were advisors in Vietnam at that time. That was 1962 or 63. And so I went in the Army. I volunteered for the Army, and I went in, and I was an enlisted man, not an officer. I went in the Army, and they asked me, you had a choice of what you wanted to be in the Army or where you wanted to go. So I said, well, I'd like to be a ranger, you know, that's a macho kind of thing. And it's so ironic because there were no openings, you know. 6 years later, I mean, the Rangers are like this, you know, elite fighting group, and they were like, all they could do to recruit as many people as they possibly could. But at the time I joined, they didn't have any space. It was filled up because a lot of people like me, I want to be a tough guy, I want to be a ranger, you know. So I said, well, what the hell? So I was a medic. So I got sent to Fort Sam Houston. I mean, I went to Fort Dix basic training, went to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and then they shipped me to Germany. Actually, I applied for officer candidate school, but there was a waiting line there too. I waited for like 4 weeks and never heard from them, which is also ironic because a few years later, it was like they were churning people out, vast numbers of officers to go get shot in Vietnam. So anyway, they sent me to Germany. And after I got out, and they had a thing called a European discharge where you could get, it was Nuremberg, Germany. and I had a great time. It was great. I had another irony. I had German in high school, and so it was perfect. I spoke pretty good German. It got better. I had a wonderful time. Hung out with a lot of German, some American soldiers, but mostly a lot of Germans, and had a group. Anyway, it was a great experience. Being in the Army was terrific.
Okay,
So
so you went to the Army, you came back, you occupied the administration building, you started the Wooden Shoe with a group of other people who were from Dartmouth, from the college.
I wasn't actually a Dartmouth student at that time, because I got kicked out again. And I was working for Dartmouth. I was an employee. I was taking care of the animals at the medical school, which is pretty weird.
That must have been unpopular when you occupied the administration.
Well, I don't know how many people I mentioned that to a lot.
Okay, so I'm just curious. I'm really fascinated by the fact that we almost can't imagine what our country was like then. It was so different. And I think
really was different.
That those changes came about right then.
Right then.
Right then. It was Vietnam catapulted our country into such turmoil and transformation. Right? The fact that you would go, oh, we're living here, we ought to grow our own food. That wouldn't have happened 6 years earlier. You wouldn't have said, oh, we ought to grow our own food. We got a frat here,
I've always felt, to this day, I am so grateful that I came into this world when I did, because I hit this really neat time. I grew up in the 50s, in Connecticut, in a lower middle class, working class situation, and it was the 50s. It's harder. There was. So much has changed, and that you're right. You're absolutely right. It was like I got to be around when Elvis Presley was really popular, and I remember, I forget a lot that when I talk to people, younger people, they just think of things as this is a given, like smartphones are a given. We had to, if you were on a highway and your car broke down, you were screwed. You'd have to, especially like women, you'd have to stand out and try to flag somebody down or something. You couldn't call them. There was no, the pay phones were few and far between, especially in Vermont. It was hard to communicate. But people did fine. They did fine. They communicated. They made it through. But there were so many things like everybody smoked cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes. Everybody threw stuff out the car window. If you had, you always flicked your butts out the car window, the beer can, whatever. It's like it was trashy. Everything was trashy. The Connecticut River, which is right over there. When I first came here, I was a junior in high school, and one hot June day, we were sitting around in this local kind of hangout, and somebody said, "Oh, it's so hot. Let's go swimming." And then they were trying to decide, to go to Velvet Rocks, go to Lake Fairleigh, all these different places. And I'm sitting there, I'm the new guy, and I said, "Well, why don't you go? You got a river right there. It's like 200 yards away from where we were. You got a river. Well, let's go swimming in the river." And they all looked at me and they just cracked up. They just laughed. They said, "You can't swim in the Connecticut River." I said, "Why not?" I said, "Have you seen what the Connecticut River looks like?" And I said, "Well, actually, I haven't paid that much attention, even though I was living, right. We could almost see it where we first lived. My dad was teaching, and so I went with my friend Bobby Brown. I said, he had a canoe. I said, "Let's go canoeing on the Connecticut River," and we went down and we put the canoe in, and we went up the river, and I realized that every town had sewer lines, or people who lived on the river had sewer lines that went right into the river. And we got up, across from the big hospital, Mary Hitchcock Hospital, and they had an open sewer from Mary Hitchcock Hospital pouring into the Connecticut River. And I literally, it was one thing to see turds and things floating around. I literally saw bloody bandages floating down the Connecticut River. I mean, that's inconceivable to people now, you know. I mean, it's almost drinkable. After the Clean Water Act and everything, I mean, that was huge, and that all happened, you know, that was all part of that change that you said, you know. I mean, it was a really neat time. It was really exciting. But anyway, to get back to the food, so we get back to these buying clubs. So we were have the buying clubs, or, you know, groups, they call them, what do they call them? Anyway, and we would have once a month, we would, what?
Food co-ops?
Food, yeah, but they were food co-ops. There were people, yeah, it was the New England People's Co-op is what it was called. And they even had a warehouse in Massachusetts. And so they kind of evolved this distribution system. But back on the commune, we figured we should grow our own food. So we had some help from this local guy, and we had no idea what we were doing. And we went out and we started trying to get somebody to plow the field, and we bought some manure from somebody, or we traded. We'd go get help the farmer get their hay in, and trade for manure. So we can put the manure in and how it in. And at one point, I bought this old John Deere tractor. I had a job working as a groundskeeper in Hanover. Anyway, so we started getting the soil, you know, ground ready, and we had the Rodale, I guess it's Rodale's Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening. And organic, I mean, this is how these people can't understand. Organic gardening was like, if you said, well, who are the organic gardeners? They'd say, well, some old lady, you know, with a little garden, and they have this magazine that they get, Organic Gardening, and they have a little push, what they call a rototiller. And Troy Built was this company that was selling these rototillers, and they would advertise in what was it called? An Organic Gardening magazine, I think.
Yeah, at some point it was called Organic Gardening and Farming. I don't know when they added the farming.
But it was like typically somebody who was 65 and retired, and they were, you know, it was just this old, you know, old people, you know, there were no young people who were organic farmers, you know, not that I knew of. And but there was this book, you know, the Organic Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening or Farming, whatever it was. And it was Rodale. Rodale had been out there for a while. I mean, I got to learn about them about that time, but they had been there for quite a while, you know. And then I found out, I started bumping into these people, these biodynamic people, whatever the hell that was, anthroposophy or some shit from some German guy. It was some philosophy of food and living and whatever. But it has a resonance, you know. I mean, and then, you know, this is about, you know, around that time, the Silent Spring. That was a incredible event. The Rachel Carson's Silent Spring was an earth-shaking thing to happen. I mean, it was very popular. A lot of people read it, and a lot of people freaked out. And, you know, they didn't maybe make changes right off, but it introduced into the conversation the concept of poisonous food and chemicals. And it doesn't take anybody very long to connect the dots, right? You got, here's this stuff that's killing all these birds. You know, the eagles, the eggs, you know, dissolve because of all this stuff, and we're eating it. and maybe that's not a good idea, you know? It's like, so there was all these kind of like ground, and it was all kind of from the ground up, you know, because there was no social media. There was no way a movement like this had to really start making a lot of noise before the Life magazine or some, you know, Newsweek or something, or TV picked up on it. It just wasn't on the radar until it came slowly at first, and then more rapidly from the ground up, and people started being conscious of it. Young people more than, you know, I mean, it was this weird connection between these old organic fuddy-duddy people and these young hippies, you know. It's like, that was almost kind of cool, you know, that connection. When we lived at Wooden Shoe, I remember there were several, it was about 50-50 men and women. And one of the women met this older widow who lived not too far away. And she got to be friends with her and started asking about canning food. You know, about how do you can food, or how do you, you know, what do you eat? Is there stuff you can eat, wild things or whatever? And this young hippie was talking to this like 70-year-old woman whose life was, you know, gone past, and wanted to know stuff from this old woman who is eager to find out. And it was like not only was it significant for us young people, it was significant for this old woman. You know, it was like it was cool. It was people like that who told us, well, you know, told us how to salt greens. Like, you take a crock, and the first greens in the spring, and we didn't even know what greens were. They said dandelion greens, you know, there's all these different greens. Well, you pick the dandelion greens in the spring, and you put them in this crock, and you put a bunch of salt on. And then if you have a garden, you have beet greens, and you take the beet greens and you put them in the next layer. And then there's nettles, wild nettles, and there's milkweed. You know, there's all these greens that we had no idea. And this woman told us, well, you take these greens and you put them in this, and you save it for the winter. This is for the winter. And in the winter, you start at the top of the crock, and you eat down through the greens. You take them out, you wash them up, you get the salt out of them, and you cook them and you eat them, you know. And the last thing you get to is the dandelion greens. And if you're really lucky, you have a meal where you have the last of the salted greens the same day you have fresh ones from the spring. I mean, what a wonderful, you know, what a wonderful circle. Food, you know. It became part of what we, as young people who consider ourselves kind of political radicals or whatever, it was a way of participating.
It was a way of connecting with each other too.
Yeah.
It was a way of finding a group and finding a connection. It became part of a bigger movement. I'm curious, Jake, at that point, did you all consider this, did this have anything to do with economics and corporate control of food, or was that not part of your understanding?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because you have to remember, we came out of the whole anti-war movement, introduced a lot of us to leftist politics, right? So when I grew up, communists were bad, right? And it was communists. And even actually, when I was growing up, labor unions were held in quite a respect. I grew up, the government was good. It took care of us. It was, people paid taxes. They didn't like paying taxes, but nobody, you know, it wasn't until Ronald Reagan came along and said, it's your money. Well, everybody knew, but before that it wasn't your money, it's our money. As soon as you pay your taxes, it's our money, right? I mean, that was like, that's the way people thought. But back to the radical politics. immediately when we understood the contradictions of Vietnam, when we understood that it was not a war like the Second World War, it was not even a war like the First World War, although that's a little fuzzy, and Korea is even more fuzzy, but it was our government. This is a government people trusted. Our government is not only doing something which doesn't make any sense, but they're doing something which is definitely harmful, and they're doing something and they're lying about it. They're constantly lying about it, and they're coming after us. It was a time when I had dozens of friends who were scared to death of getting drafted. I was lucky. I've been there. But I didn't get sent to Vietnam. I would have if I was there 1 year later. I went in 63, came out in 66. If I had gone in 64, I probably would have ended up in Vietnam. So I was over that. But I watched all these people freaking out, getting drafted, and a lot of people said, "No, I'm not gonna go." I lived with a guy before the Wooden Shoe who had federal agents show up to this house. It was a band, it was a rock and roll band. And they showed up, this car with 4 or 5 FBI agents, and they came in and they arrested him and took him away, because he was anyway. So, so back to the point. That was a wake-up call that maybe our government is not what it says it is. So there's doubt. I had also read a seminal book, which was The Ugly American. And there was another book, the same guy, A Nation of Sheep. And it was the first time anybody told me that Americans may be not so good as they think they are. The Vietnam War confirmed that. It said, this is obviously, this is not good. So where does this come from? Well, it didn't take long to connect the dots and see corporate America, corporate America was all on board with this. They were making money over this. Their kids weren't going to Vietnam. This was, and what else are they doing? Well, there's no more farmers around here. Where did they all go? They all went to big corporations who bought up the whole, who took control of the for the whole food industry. It was all connected. Vietnam, corporate America. These are not nice corporations. These are not corporations who work for people. These are not corporations who take care of their stakeholders, including their workers and the environment and the community. These are for-profit, bottom line corporations. They don't give a shit about you. They do not care about you, Mr. and Mrs. America. And they are doing whatever it takes to make as much money as they can. The food industry figured out that if they could sell people cheap, really cheap food that they grew by paying farmers very little, and they could process it so that it didn't spoil, process it so it could be used in all kinds of different ways, like all these oils and fats and things could be changed and chemically converted to this or that and the other thing, and sold to people. And then you had advertising, Okay, you get these big corporations, they figured out how to get people to think that they want things. So everybody was buying all this stuff, having no idea that it was bad for them, or that it was crooked, that it was not in everybody's interest. So these are all these connections, and so this is all happening. This is like the before the organic. At some point, there were a few people who began to figure out I mean, aside from the biodynamic people, who were kind of like a cult. I mean, that's the way people perceive them. It's kind of a cult. But if you got to the point where you didn't trust the government and you didn't trust the corporations and you didn't trust, advertisers, or if you got to that point, then it's a logical extension to say, well, wait a minute, what about all the other things? What about the environment? Didn't Rachel Carson say we're putting all this poison in the environment? How are they doing that? Well, let's see. Herbicides, pesticides. You know, you could look it up. I mean, there's all this stuff they're using, and there's nobody who's saying who can prove that it's healthy.
When you were trying to figure out how to farm organically, or even what that meant,
Yeah.
talk about that. I know that it was not obvious. Okay, you had this book from Rodale, and you got a field, and you're going, well, how do we do this?
Right.
And all the advice that was out there, all the neighbors, all the government extension agents, it was all about how to do it with chemicals.
Yeah, that's true. Well, good. That's a great question. And okay, so I started collecting books because people said, well, how did you learn how to farm? I said, I read books. The British have a whole bunch of practical farming books. They tell you exactly how to plow a field, how to measure it out, make sure that it's uniform, how to make a dead furrow at the end of the field. It's like all this stuff. You know, the British are very good about that, very simple stuff. Then there was this organic encyclopedia, right? And it was just filled with all this stuff. I don't even know where the Rodale came up with this stuff. But then there were also, I got this book, Soils and Civilization. I got the handbook of fertilizer, a book about fertilizer, how to manufacture all the different kinds of fertilizer. I mean, chemical fertilizer. I got an old book, Gardening for Profit, right? By this guy who is outside of New York City. They used to have these market gardens. I mean, Henderson? It was incredible. Yeah. Like right out, they take the horse from the city. The horse was more expensive than the labor. They weren't necessarily organic, but when they were written, they didn't have anything but organic. Because they didn't have, aside from gentian blue, or whatever it's called, and arsenic.
It was pretty organic. There just was no movement. There was no name yet.
And the thing, like around New York City, all of horse manure, there was huge amounts of horse manure. The horse manure on these big wagons would go out to what's now suburbs. And all the marshes around were all channeled, and they grew marsh hay, which is an incredible thing because it's in the ocean, its fertility is every tide is renewed. So that was the main hay they fed the horses, with this marsh hay. It's Logan Airport in Boston. When you fly out of there, you can still see the lines, all these lines in the marshes. Anyway, so there's these books, and I just got all these different
Farmers
books.
for 40 Centuries, yeah. Jake. That's a very important one.
What?
Farmers for 40 Centuries.
Yeah, Farmers for 40 Centuries. Yeah.
Very important because it looks back on a 4,000-year history of what was organic farming. There was no movement.
Right.
It wasn't called that, but it was what it was. And that was written by a guy from the USDA who was like blown away by he went over in 1910 or something, and they're still doing it then. They're not doing it now, but they were doing it then.
Well, I remember, we're out on, a lot of this was out in the commune. We didn't have any electricity, so it was like kerosene lantern at night with my Lucky Strikes and reading this stuff. And I remember being amazed where he described how they took all this vegetative material and night soil and all this stuff and put it together and put it in these big piles and had it all, I don't know, I guess that was an anaerobic thing that they were doing, but they had all kinds of ways that they used to put up. My wife was in China in the 70s, and she said even then along the roads, you never had to worry about where you take a shit, because every few hundred yards was a little outhouse with please come here and shit in our outhouse, right? Don't pee on the ground, pee in here. And that's what they were using for fertilizer. So anyway, there was all these books, and it was really exciting. It was like the farmers of 40 centuries. I mean, it was like, wow, that is so cool. That makes so much sense. All this stuff made so much sense. It was so simple because the reality was so simple. The reality was the whole agricultural system was totally screwed up. It was just obvious. As soon as you began to have the eyes to see it, it just was so obvious. These going down the road with these, I remember when they were spraying corn around here, going down the road with pesticide dribbling, they'd clean the tank out. The guy would throw some water in with the atrazine and clean it out driving down Route 5, I mean, that's what, no problem there, And
so Jake, you were tapping into the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years from around the world from all these books
right.
that you were reading, and you're using that to inform your understanding of a kind of agriculture that you were calling organic. So could you briefly just kind of give people who don't understand an overview of what you were learning organic agriculture meant? What was organic farming?
Well, I kind of remember thinking about when I first started thinking of dirt in a different way, because all these organic people, they kept talking about the soil and life in the soil and the connection between the life. I just thought it was dirt. And then I started reading about how there's like zillions of these organisms and stuff, and they're all doing things or not doing things. If they're chemical agriculture, there was, so it was kind of an interesting. I started realizing that the soil was actually alive, like it's like you better start thinking about it as like an animal, like you're not going to go take your milk cow and hit her and not feed her enough if you want to get milk from the cow, and maybe you shouldn't beat up on the soil too much either, because if all that stuff's going on there.
All right, Jake, let me just ask you. So you did learn your craft, and you became a successful organic vegetable farmer, and I got to come and work for you as you were scaling up and moving to better land and closer to a market so that you could make a business that worked. And you became a really fine farmer, and I'll say that as someone who's eaten a lot of your food. And no, you're held in tremendously high respect by the farmers of the Northeast, and you were selected to be one of the agrarian elders, and appropriately so. You got to go out and meet your Western brothers and sisters, people from around the country, and Amigo and the folks from Full Belly. It was great. It was like more networking. So I want to take us up to basically I think there was a turning point in there somewhere around 2014 where we started to become aware of how far the USDA's National Organic Program had strayed from our intention. And honestly, I was against the USDA getting involved back when 1990 or whatever, when the Organic Food Production Act passed. I was like, well, this isn't going to lead to anything good. And then I decided I was wrong. I decided, no, this actually is working out really well. The organic stuff in Vermont is growing and growing, and it's grown with integrity. And I agree with the standards, and I agree with everything. And then I started to because of the hydroponic issue, and because I wholesale
Yeah, well,
tomatoes, I started
just
learning.
let me just interject.
Yeah.
I did too. I remember we had a big debate in Vermont. In Vermont, you know, everybody said, "Oh, all you old hippies, you know, you're against the government. You know, this is a really good thing, and Vermont should just keep its own standard." I mean, and we had, and there was a big debate, right? And I was on your side too. I grew up trusting the government, like in certain ways. Like my dad was a politician, and I never thought badly of politicians. I've always felt positively, you know, with anyway, with the nuance there. But I thought that, you know, the government could run it because it seemed to be grassroots. It had some good people behind supporting it. Senator Leahy was totally, you know, he was a really main person behind it. And I thought, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have every state is going to have its own little certification thing. This is screwed up. That's not going to work. And it's going to cost money. Where's the money going to come from? Who's going to support it? How much is it going to cost to get certified and all that? You know, so this is great. You know, let the government. You know, they, you know, at that time, extension had gotten much more enlightened. You know, there was environmental concerns were high on everybody's list. People, you know, were seeing a lot of government activity as being very almost progressive, but definitely on the right side. And I thought, well, you know, let's let them do it. And I agree. I agreed with you. I was on that side. I said, no, let's just you know, we don't want to screw around with this. It's going to take up too much time and energy, and it's going to be not workable to have every state have a different thing. You know, I was wrong. And it took a few years. It took a few years for the engine of corporate America to switch into gear. And I know how that happened. It happened because there came a point when corporate agriculture started seeing that they were losing market share in certain areas, that people were actually not buying from the big California Zuma farms, whatever, that people were buying local produce. That's one thing. And the other thing was people were coming into supermarkets and saying, do you have any organic produce? And at first it was like, there's a thing, the Vegetable Growers magazine. At first they had these articles that were like, oh, these organic people, you know, they're so unreal. It was like negative. I mean, negative. And ironically now, like half the magazine is about organic, right? So it's America. They started seeing when the money started changing, when people started actually wanting organic produce, then it was time for them to figure out, well, we ought to have an organic line of some kind. And as soon as they did that, then they started advertising organic. And when it was a snowball. I mean, they started advertising. So when the supermarket chains were starting to talk about how they had organic food available, it was raising the consciousness of everybody. Oh yeah, organic. Oh yeah, that's a good thing. And they were pushing it. They were saying, yeah, we have organic. We have better organic than they do down at the other supermarket. You know, we have a bit, you know. And so they started, you know, that's what they started to do. But they soon found out that it was getting competitive. So how do you cut corners? How do you, it's kind of hard to grow organically. It's not real easy. So what are the things you can do? And that's what you're about to talk about.
Well, you can talk about it. So you spoke at the big Thetford rally. I think you spoke at the very first rally at Stowe too. Did you go to that?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, I think so. And so, you know, we were trying to create awareness, and we were trying to reform. the National Organic Program. That was the core effort, was like, look at what's happening. This isn't right. Let's bring a lot of public awareness. And we started to have these rallies to raise awareness. And I vividly remember you speaking on the speaker's wagon at Cedar Circle when we had that. And at that point, there were other people in the country who were focused on issues, but we were really seeing this hydroponic invasion of produce. As it turned out, not just vegetables, but berries was actually the big one. We didn't even know about that.
Didn't even know about
Didn't
it.
even know about it,
Didn't
right?
even know.
We saw the hydroponic tomatoes. That's what we saw, and it was in the USDA task force I was on at the end of it that we got given a case study of Driscoll's. Yeah. And we were like, what? Driscoll's is growing hydroponic berries? It was completely unknown.
Yeah, it was really under the radar.
So we have a problem. We in the organic movement have a problem, and the organic movement. Yeah, I know. We'll tie it up.
No, it's all right. No,
the organic movement a little bit went to sleep when the USDA took over. We all did, because it didn't matter what we thought, didn't matter what we said. We used to have that painful meeting every year. We'd come and argue with each other all day about what the standard should be. It was good.
Yeah.
And we would talk and back and forth, and we would disagree, and we would come up with an impossible decision about, well, no, it can't be done that way, because that's really lost the whole spirit and the reason behind why we have the organic movement. And we lost all that when the USDA came over and said, we're gonna decide what organic is.
And not only that, we're gonna have a board that's gonna be basically farmers. They're gonna be an advisory board, and they are to advise the National Organic Program. They're going to be advisors, and we are going to see we're good faith here. We got farmers. So much for farmers, right?
Yeah, it turned out not such strong representation from farmers.
Right.
They only had 4 farmer seats out of 15, and of those 4, half of them tended to be corporate managers.
Right.
Who hadn't gotten their hands dirty in a very long time. Okay, so things went bad. People are waking up to it. That's why the Real Organic Project exists. You're a certified real organic farmer. Do you think we have a snowball's chance in hell, as Elliot would put it?
Well, you mean staying with the USDA?
Well, do you think that we can
USDA,
create?
It's the marketing, whatever.
Do you think we can create an organic movement? We did it once before. You were there in the beginning. There was no store demand for an organic product from the wooden shoe, and we've grown a great deal from there. And it's been turbulent, and it continues to be turbulent. And I personally believe it didn't matter if we had the government involved or not, because I see countless things. Let's look at regenerative agriculture. There's no government involvement in terms of defining it, and I would say it's been completely compromised by large corporate embrace of the term. That, you know, everybody, Syngenta and Bayer Monsanto and McDonald's and Pepsi and ADM and Bunge, they all now embrace that we are going to support regenerative agriculture, whatever that means, and it means whatever we think it means. So it didn't matter. It wasn't that they were buying off the government or influencing the government. They just did it because dollars were moving there. Dollars hadn't even moved there. It was just that people were really excited and interested in this. So my question is it possible to have a movement of farmers and eaters that say, this is the kind of farming that we support, this is the kind of farming that we want to buy from, this is the kind of farming we want to promote? Is that possible, or is it just hopeless? Is it impossible in this world of ours?
It's going to hit a place where there's a lot of hard work and probably a lot of fundraising and whatever to get it there, but it's going to reach a point where it's going to become visible. And it's like deja vu all over again. It's like the original organic. It wasn't until It reached a certain level of consciousness that people said, oh, I get it. I get it. There's an answer to this. I get it. There's a problem with organic. And I also get it. There's an answer. And this answer is to create a different reality, which is or a different thing, whatever you want to call it. And it's called real organic. And it means that it's real organic. Nothing funny, no funny business, straightforward, right out of the book. It's written down in the organic standards. All they're doing is saying that this is got to be the Bible. You know, it's not, you know, with some nuance, but still this is what the National Organic Program should be. And they're not doing it, so this is what we're going to have, and we're going to add it on.
Jake,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Okay.
We'll close it there. I appreciate it very much, always.
I talk a lot. I had a cup of coffee before you came, and just to make sure.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe and share the link with your friends. Please take the time today to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to so that others can find us. A video version of this interview is found at realorganicproject.org and by following our YouTube channel. Please join us next time when our guest will be Helen Attow, a longtime small-scale farmer and researcher who is just releasing a book called The Ecological Farm, a minimalist, no-till, no-spray, selective weeding, grow-your-own fertilizer system for organic agriculture. If you'd like to dig in further on the subject matter we've been exploring this year about the rise of USDA support for chem no-till agriculture as climate smart and its affiliation with regenerative labeling in the marketplace, you can find tickets to the recordings of our recent symposia at realorganicsymposium.org.